awesome, guys. Awesome to be here. So today I'm going to talk about a note on bridges and layer 2 protocols, and I have to thank Infura for providing me the time to do this. They basically just let me do what I want on the layer 2 protocols. Woo, awesome. So just to begin, I feel like I'm going to preach to the choir here. As most people are aware, cryptocurrencies don't scale very well. Bitcoin supports like 10 transactions per second, and Ethereum's about 15 transactions per second. And as we're all aware, once you go above that transaction throughput ceiling, the fees skyrocket. I used to make the joke that it would go from like a penny to $10, but now it goes from $10 to like $400 for a single transaction. So, raise your hand if you've ever paid more than $500 for a transaction. There we go. We found the apes, found some of the anons. The fees are just ludicrous right now. They're crazy. But of course, there's projects out there that claim that they can do 65,000 transactions per second, and surely this isn't a problem. So surely we just end the talk, end the conference, and just go get, enjoy ourselves. But of course, we also know Solana just implemented transaction fees because clearly this is a problem. They need a rate limit. So clearly the job isn't done yet. No, this isn't it. So the question is, why have we not solved the problem? And it really comes down to the concept of decentralization, which means different things to different people. The way I contextualize it is basically we have this single goal. Can we allow a percentage of the world's population to validate transactions and blocks in real time? So regardless if you're in the United States, Sudan, France, Spain, Indonesia, a certain percentage should be able to validate blocks and transactions and enforce the consensus rules and ultimately protect the ledger and the database. So it's a bit like, Captain Planet, we put our rings together and we fight off the adversary. Now, because of this goal, we have artificially constrained the CPU, the storage, and the bandwidth that is available to these networks. And what we end up with is a computer that feels like it's from the 1970s, as slow, as expensive, and everyone in the house has to share it. This is a picture of baby Vitalik with his little computer, and that's probably more powerful than Ethereum as well. So that's quite frustrating. But does that mean we should just give up on scaling? Because now we have this weird trade-off. We've artificially constrained the resources, but now it's really expensive to use. And most people don't want to pay $400 for a transaction. So we have the trade-off, scalability and affordability to make sure that most people actually just want to validate the blockchain. They have an incentive to do that. And as a result, what we end up with is this goal where scalability really means, can we increase the transaction throughput while still adhering to the same set of resources? That's basically the goal of what it means to be scalable. And so what we've ended up with this conference is about L2 beats, is this third way. Can we take transactions that should be on the main chain? Can we take these transactions, move them off chain, and then allow Alice to Bob transact locally amongst themselves with the same security as if they just transacted on Ethereum? If we can take it off chain and keep the same level of security, then we have managed to scale Ethereum without using its resources. And that's the goal for off-chain protocols. Now, let's talk about off-chain protocols. Raise your hand if you've ever used an exchange before. Most people have, we're at a crypto conference. Don't worry, I'm not from the SEC. I'm not going to tell everyone. But, we all typically use an exchange and deposited funds onto it. Now, the problem with and actually for a very long time, if you consider Bitcoin, Ethereum, and even Tron for the past 7 years, they were really this interruptibility solution for exchanges. You're on Coinbase, you see this arbitrage moment in Bitstamp, so you move your funds across using Bitcoin or Ethereum, you're on Bitstamp, and then you satisfy that arbitrage and you make some money. For a very long time, that's why they were really useful for, and arguably, Bitcoin and Tron still useful for that, and now the entire ecosystem's on Ethereum for doing this. But the issue with these exchanges, while they process the majority of transactions, they're custodial. They can freeze, confiscate, and lose your funds. There's the Coinbase support meme that you're sitting around for 3 weeks to get your account unlocked. And the other issue is that the database is just not auditable. We have to blindly trust entities like, the crypto exchanges that indeed they can, if I need to withdraw my funds, that they're good for the money. They have the assets that cover their liabilities. But what is at the heart of this type of interaction with Coinbase at all. At the heart of it is really bridge engineering. All we've been building for the past 10 years are bridges. And at the Coinbase example, we're on Ethereum, we send our funds to something called the bridge contract that will hold the assets for the exchange. Then we have the exchange themselves as a single authority that has full control over these assets. It's the one ring to rule them all. And you could imagine this bridge contract has some functionality. It has a deposit function, a withdrawal function, and also this allowance to support withdrawals. So if Alice wants to withdraw her funds from Coinbase, she'll ping Coinbase to say, Coinbase, let me withdraw 1,000 ETH. Coinbase will then send a message or a transaction to the bridge contract to say, Alice, you can now withdraw 1,000 ETH. Now remember, it's the bridge contract that holds the funds. And the bridge contract's basically going to take this message from Coinbase, and it's going to say, well, I trust Coinbase. They have an off-chain database that covers all of my liabilities. I have all the assets, and I trust Coinbase that the database is correct and that this withdrawal is a valid transaction, and I can indeed give 1,000 ETH to Alice. And of course, Alice can then come along and just withdraw her funds from the system. Now, generically, what's happening here? What's the generic idea? The generic idea is that there's this bridge contract with all of the assets, thousands and millions and even billions of dollars worth of assets are sitting on this bridge. And then there's this off-chain database. The off-chain database has the account balances, the state of the program, etc., what's important for a database. And the database really details the liabilities of what the bridge should be able to cover in the future. And there's this trust assumption. The bridge has to somehow verify that the database is correct before it's able to process a withdrawal. And historically, this trust assumption has evolved over the years. So I gave the example of the single authority, the one ring to rule them all. The Coinbases and the Bitstamps. Then we have the multi-authority. So the idea is that we can distribute out the trust. Maybe we trust 5 out of 9 validators. And if 5 people say it's correct, then I can issue this withdrawal. And then we have these crypto-economic bridges like Polygon, where the idea is that we can't really appoint 9 validators, so they should appoint themselves and have skin in the game. So I got these stats from 2021, and you can see that in the Polygon bridge, there's 6 authorities that basically protect the database and control all funds in the bridge. And if they colluded, they could also steal all the funds in the bridge. We're trusting them to protect the database. Now, trusting a set of parties to protect our funds, that sucks, right? But it doesn't just suck, It's not even that they're malicious, they're just also incompetent. Like over the years, we've seen so many hacks from exchanges. The first hack I could find was from 2011, and they're just being hacked one joke was being hacked every 2 weeks. I got this data from Taylor's spreadsheet. I can share the link later. So he's been detailing these hacks for years. And one example is Mt. Gox. 6% of all Bitcoin got stolen in a single hack. Now we just brush this aside as if, that never really happened. That 6% Bitcoin, it's fungible. We don't have to care about it. But this is terrible. It just keeps getting hacked. And not because they're malicious, they're just incompetent. It's just difficult to secure billions of dollars. Then we had the multi-authority hack. There were 5 out of 9 validators compromised, and it led to $500 million being taken from the bridge. In reality, 4 validators were controlled by one company, and this company had pseudo control over another company and led to all the funds being stolen again. So multi-authority doesn't solve the problem. And then there was this great thread by Kelvin, who's next door. I don't really know what Beanstalk Farm is. I don't know, I'm not the biggest ape in the world. But basically, there was a flash loan that undermined the governance protocol, and they stole all the funds from that system as well. So even if you have a lot of money locked in the bridge to protect it, that can still be undermined. So there's this old school motto, not your keys, not your coins. Maybe you want to say it with me, not your keys, not your coins. The whole point is that we shouldn't be giving away custody of our funds to a third party. I should have my key. I should be able to sign the transaction, authorize everything, and not have to trust the counterparty. So the question is, can we transact on an off-chain system while still allowing users to maintain self-custody of their funds? And this is not a new idea. So back in the day, in 2014, there was the original sidechain paper, and the goal there was to build a trustless bridge. They don't use the word bridge in the paper because that's a new idea, but there's this interoperability solution where I can lock Bitcoins on Bitcoin and unlock them on this experimental blockchain. And I shouldn't have to trust the operators of that other system. And if you're going to give it a name, you could call it a consensus bridge, where the bridge holds the funds, and it will unlock the funds back to the user on Ethereum if the consensus protocol of that other system agrees to it. And I think the Rainbow Bridge is along these lines as well. They use SPV proofs to facilitate that. But the issue is that the bridge cannot check the database is correct. It can only follow and trust the judgment of that other consensus protocol. So again, we're trusting a set of parties with our funds. Now you could reason about it and say, well, the Bitcoin consensus protocol, that's not going to get hijacked anytime soon. But you now have to make this judgment call for every other sidechain that you're going to rely upon. And there's two problems. One, a bridge cannot stop invalid transactions. And two, if if the consensus protocol goes offline, your funds get stuck. All the operators disappear, sidechain makes no progress, the bridge can't learn about new withdrawals, your funds get stuck. And that's why it's still not trustless. So can we really build a bridge that protects us from an all-powerful adversary? And that's the idea behind these validating bridges, but that's what I've been calling them anyway, these rollups, where the bridge the idea of the bridge is that the bridge will check that the database is correct, it's intact, and it's alive. And this is the goal of these rollups, the Optimistic Ethereum, the Arbitrum, ZK Sync, Starkware. They're all trying to build these validating bridges where you don't have to trust the operators. All the operators could be offline, and you can still get your funds out of the system. And the bridge can verify that the database is intact and not broken. So it independently checks that, it checks every single update, and it assumes there's one honest party that could be anyone in this room who could force progress and for transactions to eventually be executed. And ultimately, this implies that the layer 1 blockchain, Ethereum, is protecting you. It's a bit like, I think it's Mayweather, isn't it? I don't actually know the boxer. But he's basically punching the adversary. They try to censor your transaction? No. They include invalid transactions? No. They withhold your data? No. Ethereum is protecting you with these systems. And it's really like the marvels of engineering now when you hear about all these different rollups. The most famous bridge, the Twisty bridge, the ZK bridge. And it all sounds really cool, but now the question is, how does this work? How do we actually build a validating bridge? So what I'm going to try to do today is present, who are the agents, who are the people involved in the protocol, a high-level overview of how a validating bridge works, the threat model, and finally the security properties. What does it mean to be secure? So the agents are very straightforward. We have an honest user. We can call her Alice. She likes mooncats. She has a mooncat on the roll-up, and she just wants to play with her mooncat. We have a sequencer, and their only job is to provide a user experience. They take the transactions from the user, they'll order them, and then eventually post them somewhere else. Then the executor is the one who takes the ordered transactions, execute them, and then the executor will try to convince the bridge contract that this is indeed an update to the database, a valid update. So as a high-level overview, and just as a disclaimer, not all rollups follow this picture or animation, but it gives a rough idea how they work, at an abstract level. So we have the sequencer, and Alice comes along, and Alice wants to transact on the rollup. Alice will deposit funds into the bridge contract. Then her balance will be reflected on this off-chain database. Then Bob comes along, hi Bob, and Alice wants to send one coin to Bob. So Alice will sign this transaction and give it to the sequencer. Now the sequencer will have the transaction, and they can notify Bob to say, Bob, you're going to get this coin very soon, but it's not yet confirmed or finalized. The sequencer will wait around. As you do, these transactions are pending, and eventually the sequencer will post the list of transactions to the bridge contract. And the bridge contract is now aware of the list of pending transactions that should be executed. But they're not yet executed, it's not final yet, they're just ordered. And then we wait around again for someone to come along and convince the bridge contract about its final execution. That's what the executor does. They take the pending list of order transactions, they'll execute them, and they'll pose a small checkpoint to the bridge to say, bridge, this is the new state of the database. This is how we update the database given those lists of transactions. And I have a little 1990 animation there on how to do the execution. And they post a checkpoint. Now, what's important is that the bridge contract must receive indisputable evidence that this checkpoint is correct. And it will do this continuously, forever. Every new update, this is the new state of the database, here's the evidence, and the bridge will check, yep, I'm convinced that the update to the database is correct and valid. And of course, the database should be public. And anyone in this room, including Alice, can get a copy of the database, recompute it themselves, and have an independent copy of this database. Very much like how Ethereum works today. Now, what's the adversarial threat model? What does it mean to be secure in this context? Or at least who are we trying to protect against? So, one part of the threat model is that the adversary can control the entire message flow on the layer 2 system. They can view, reorder, and drop all messages on the layer 2 system. The only guarantee Alice has is that she can send a transaction to the layer 1 and to the bridge contract. That's her only guarantee for message delivery. The second is that the adversary can corrupt nearly every single party in the system. All sequencers, nearly all the executors, and there's really only one honest party, which is the user themselves, and the bridge contract. And in this context, the funds still have to be safe in the bridge. What we've really described is the most powerful adversary possible. They can corrupt everyone, they can drop all the messages. The only thing they can't break is cryptography, and of course the bridge contract itself. And I guess as you saw yesterday with the L2B talk, with the risk framework, not every rollup can fully defeat this adversary or this beast. It's still very much a work in progress to build a full validating bridge that can defeat the beast. And this brings me to a wonderful tweet by Georgius in 2019. He has this wonderful thread about rollups. And in it he says that, L2 security should equal L1 security. But I would argue that's too ambiguous. Layer 2 protocols cannot have the same security as layer 1. But the goal is to get very close. And it's really that closeness that we're all debating about. How close are we getting to the layer 1 security? So what does it mean to be secure then in this context? Now the goal, I tend to think we all forget about the goal sometimes. The goal is there's this off-chain database that has the account balances, the state of the smart contract, and our goal is to protect its safety and its liveness. Safety is in like the integrity of the database, and liveness such that anyone can update the database eventually. The three properties are, data availability. How is the bridge contract convinced that anyone can get a copy of the database? 2, state transition integrity. How is the bridge convinced that any update to that database is valid and correct? And 3, censorship resistance. How is the bridge contract convinced that the database is alive and anyone can process a transaction, even if all the operators are dishonest or malicious or just offline? So let's talk about the data availability problem. It's a very straightforward problem. Alice wants a copy of the database and to compute it herself. And there's several reasons why you would want this. One is audibility. Maybe it's an optimistic rollup, and Alice wants to recompute the database herself to make sure there's never been any invalid state transition on the database. 2 is interaction. Alice has a mooncat. So you might want to check the rollup database to say, yep, I still have my mooncat. My mooncat's in the database. And 3, she may have to provide evidence to the bridge contract that she is entitled to withdraw her mooncat or to withdraw some funds from the system. Now, this is where we get the phrase rollup, as we've seen in one of the earlier talks, is one of the ideas from Barry Whitehat, where we take the transaction data or the state diff or the database data, and we just post all that to Ethereum. And we rely on Ethereum to guarantee the availability of data. Now, recently, there's this idea of a data availability layer. Maybe you give it to a committee, you give it to Ethereum, you give it to this dedicated layer. Everyone's given up on the challenge process that was Plasma. That was just a no-go, that was too hard. So we just post it somewhere and just guarantee that it's available. But that's, the idea behind the rollup, and that's how we solve that one problem. So now the cost is bandwidth, how much data can I post to Ethereum, and no longer compute. What about the state transition integrity problem? I mean, this is a very simple problem. You have an adversary, and they want to steal all the money from the system. If they can post an update where they modify the database in an invalid way, and they steal everyone's money, clearly we don't want that to happen. That sort of sucks very much. And bingo, this is where we get the optimistic versus the ZK, the fault proof versus the validity proofs. And this is what most people argue about. We actually have a ZK conferences downstairs dedicated to the ZK part of how to solve this problem. And I just like to highlight that it's one problem out of many that we need to solve for rollups. And sometimes there's a bit too much focus on the single problem. Because one of the big problems is censorship resistance. How do we guarantee that, if Alice sends a message to the sequencer and says, sequencer, I want to withdraw my money. And the sequencer says, haha, no, you can't withdraw your money from the system. How do we guarantee she can still get her money from the system? And I think last summer when I looked at this, there's only one project that actually had any form of censorship resistance for a smart contract enabled rollup, and that was the Arbitrum project. Now people are starting to implement it, but it's not really been a golden focus for a lot of these projects. But how would we implement it? One thing I want to highlight is that the sequencer, they have nothing to do with censorship resistance whatsoever. The sequencer's only job is to offer a user experience and the fast path for a transaction inclusion. And it sort of brings me to Barry's comment during his talk. He mentioned that the miners on Bitcoin or Ethereum, they focus on optimizing their mining rig and making money. Yeah. The way rollups are going to compete is that the block producer is actually going to compete on the user experience. He was saying the idea that you could remove transaction fees altogether from the user by using MEV. The sequencer must compete on user experience. But again, they have nothing to do with censorship resistance whatsoever. It's really up to the executors who guarantee liveness of the execution. And we just need one of them to be honest. Well, I guess there's two parts. One, you submit the transaction to the bridge to be ordered, and then an executor can pick it up later. And this set must be as big as wide as possible, but that's details for another day. I just want to summarize that, there's three problems that we're trying to solve: data availability, state transition integrity, and censorship resistance. If we can satisfy all the problems, then hopefully we can slay the beast and deploy a secure layer 2 system. There's actually a meme from 2014 for the bear wheel, but I put an Ethereum logo there instead. And of course, other problems do arise. There are the three core problems, but there's so many problems still to solve for rollups, but that's for another day. So I guess that's where I finished my talk. Oh, actually, no, it's not. I got two more slides, sorry. One is, what's really cool about the rollups is that it does bring down the cost of a transaction. So if we look at a swap on Uniswap, last year it went from 120K gas to 5K gas, and now that's going down even further, which is awesome. ZK Sync had transfers at 1,000 gas for a while. And what we're really building in this new Web3 is that we're really moving from cryptocurrencies being this, I guess in a way, cryptocurrencies are still the interruptibility solution. But we're replacing the Coinbases, the Bitstamps, and the Binances with rollups. Because they're both building bridges. It's just one bridge has custody of millions of dollars, and the other bridge, the operators have no custody of your funds, because you still have custody of it. And so custody becomes a liability for most off-chain systems. So when people ask me, how do we convince people to use rollups? I don't think it'll be the users who care about it. Users don't care if they're using Coinbase or Arbitrum, for example. What really matters is the operators. Coinbase doesn't necessarily want custody of 11% of the entire market cap, which I think they have today. Where if you're a rollup operator, you could have 11% of all assets on your chain, but still not have the liability to keep that safe or the custody of it. And so it'll really be the businesses that move on the rollups to get rid of this custody problem. And most importantly, this old dream of the side chains are now alive and well. All these rollup projects have funky experimental virtual machines that they can now deploy and still retain the security of Ethereum. And that's why it's just really exciting, and Bitcoin sort of gave up on this dream very early on, and this has been continued with Ethereum. that's my last slide. Thank you, guys.